Trick of the Tail from Memro by Liquid City Memoirs, 2015. Welcome back to Hybrid Theory. And while the subject of tonight's stream is intel and fabrication, I find myself starting with politics outright. And in this case, the addition of Dr. Lisa Su to PCAST. Now, I'm just going to scroll down the PCAST list here, and you might notice something off about this list. There are a lot of PhDs on here, but not a lot of, there's a lot of names here, but not many of these. Okay, I'm just gonna flat out and say this. This is Biden doing a cover his ass. The thing is, Biden, we know, we have evidence, we have proved he is effectively owned by the Chinese Communist Party, and that will become very important in a few minutes. We know that AMD is having supply issues due to OEM, that is, original equipment manufacturers, and original design manufacturers, or ODMs, that are selling pallets of AMD graphic cards to Bitcoin miners for calculatory control before those cards ever have a chance to reach the retail market. We have the photos from Dubai that were shipped straight from from CCP factories to miners in Dubai. This isn't a question. These are the facts. This is what happened. AMD has no control over that supply. And we're looking through a big list of PhDs, MSCEs, SCDs. We're looking through a lot of big title from people who have accomplished zilch in California Institute of Technology, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Texas A&M University, New Mexico State University. Uh, there's a lot of there are a lot of educational facilities that are represented with people who have been through those systems and have nothing to show for it at all. And and it's one of the things here, if you don't have somebody like Lisa Su, who has accomplished something, on a list of theoretically science and technology advisors, yeah, everyone else start to stand out as abject failures. They really haven't accomplished anything. And I really don't know what Lisa Su can accomplish as a PCAST member. What I do know is that there's nobody on this list who is going to do anything or solve any problems or going to provide any helpful. Let me start where I really wanted to start, and not this story. And that's the flat out lie from the Shanghai Municipal People's Government, that is to say, the Chinese Communist Party, that they are building in conjunction with SMIC a gigafab to produce 28 nanometer and above parts to solve the chip shortage worldwide. Never mind that SMIC isn't actually allowed to sell to a number of countries due to its CCP ties, and I do believe this has now been proven. Implementation of aggressive and malicious firmware in shipping devices. SMIC is not a good guy. Hasn't been for a while. They are under lock and key at the CCP. Now, the reason why this is important is that the chip shortage itself is artificial. If we take a look at, we're going to do rare earth minerals mining. And the very first thing that DuckDuckGo gives us is that there are rare earth element mineral deposits in the United States. There are rare earth mineral deposits in Australia. There are rare earth mineral deposits in New Zealand. There are rare earth mineral deposits in Mexico. There are rare earth mineral deposits in Vietnam. There are rare earth mineral deposits all over the world. Now, because a certain political party, and if you guessed the Democrats, you would be correct, have prevented and enacted legislation that makes onerous and unviable the excavation and acquisition of rare earth minerals in the continental United States and international waters connected to the continental United States, as well as in international waters in non continental states, Alaska and Hawaii, as well as illegal in protected territories, aka Guam, aka Puerto Rico. The Democrats have successfully enabled and enacted legislation that prevents the United States from having its own supply of rare earth minerals, even though it hasn't. Democrats, or socialists as they're known in other countries, have enacted similar legal barriers to prevent other nations from likewise obtaining the equipment or getting their own supply of rare earth minerals, leaving China as the default provider of rare earth minerals, even though these rare earth element minerals aren't actually that rare. See, that's the first problem. We're being told that the chip shortage is due to shortage of rare earth minerals. No, it's not. It's due to the Democrats preventing people, the socialists, from preventing actual people from providing the rare earth minerals or getting to the rare earth minerals and stopping attempts to secure supplies of rare earth minerals. Now, this was actually something we do know that the Trump presidential administration and Secretary Pompeo were working on in regards to specifically we know South Korea, we know Australia, we're pretty sure on New Zealand, and we're pretty sure on Vietnam that there were deals and procedures in place to supply specific mining equipment to these other nations so that they could get to their rare earth mineral supplies cost effectively and environmentally efficiently. That is to say, the least amount of destruction to the environment in order to obtain these rare earth minerals. The Democrats obstructed those efforts, just as the Democrats have obstructed the Keystone Pipeline, nuclear power, and other major infrastructural upgrades within the United States. One of the channels that I watch on YouTube, Greg's Automobile and Airplanes. Sorry if I got channel wrong. When he was in another country, he took photos out of his hotel room of all these skyscrapers going off into the mountains, and that kind of buildup is something that is just not allowed in the United States because of the Democrats. If you're sensing a theme here, you pretty much caught on. Almost all of our problems with obtaining chip shortages, they're not due to a real labor shortage. They're due to socialist policies being forced upon innocent citizens in order to effect a political agenda. Now, I want to continue on SMIC and another factor where these guys are lying. They just are. And to do that, I need to bring up car chips. Most car chips, the transistors that are used in automotives, are fabbed anywhere from 45 nanometers to 90 nanometers. So a fabrication facility that's starting at 28 nanometers isn't targeting the automotive market. It's not. It's right here. This is Fortune.com. By no means a conservative website, by no means a foundationalist website. And even they are saying, in their own words, these employ comparatively simple transistors that can be anywhere from 45 nanometers to as much as 90 nanometers in size, far too large and too primitive to be suitable for today's smartphones. That's an interesting question. So, what processors are made on 28 nanometer processes? Hmm. Well, you may already see from the title, processors on 28 nanometers. What are we looking at here? Global 28 smartphones. Qualcomm Snapdragon 800, 28 nano smartphone. COVID-19 impact on global 28 nanometer smart. Hmm. ARM processors. ARM processors. ARM processor heist. The semiconductor heist of the century. ARM China has stolen intellectual property from ARM. 28 nanometers, ARM processors, 28 nanometer fab, backed by the CCP. Remember what I've been saying over previous live streams? That I have been stating that China is building ARM processors internally in order to take over calculatory control of digital currencies. Well, here's the fab that they're going to build those processors in. These processors aren't going to be found in automotive. They're going to be shipped straight to CCP data centers and replace the graphic processors that are being bought up. And the big question here is, well, why would the CCP trade off graphic processors for ARM processors that are not as efficient at certain calculations? Well, the answer is really, really simple. Digital currencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, those currencies are crashing naturally as the intended target that they could be used for. In this case, specifically to track. You hear that Bitcoin is supposed to be anonymous. It's not. If you have calculatory control, you can easily figure out who's transferring what and where they're transferring it to because you are doing all the processing work. The CCP has owned almost all of the digital currencies in the world through the Bitcoin and Ethereum and other digital currency mining facilities that they have funded and racked full of graphic cards in order to perform those kinds of processing in order to perform that processing needed at the scale required. Now, switching to ARM processors for these calculatory control facilities has an interesting implication. First of all, most of the people who were using digital currencies to bypass international restrictions or evade travel, most of those people who were legitimate targets for the CCP long ago figured out when some of them started getting executed, and yes, I use executed, by CCP operatives, especially we're talking about Christian pastors and Muslim, whatever they call their priests, imams, uh, those leading the practice of the Muslim faith in China, and Christian pastors who were being executed, and the only thing any of them had in common was they had traded using digital currencies. Secret's kind of out there. The CCP is using their calculatory control to unmask and identify subversive elements. And there's another story in here. Uh, Xiaomi phones, Europe, censorship. And we'll see what this one. Lithuania says throw away Chinese phones due to censorship. Expert warn Xiaomi phones have built-in censorship. Xiaomi responds. Xiaomi has the power to censor your phone. This is all broken through in the last couple of days. Xiaomi implemented censoring technology in order that could be turned on Xiaomi phones that would automatically censor any CCP critical comments, posts, or other such communications. This isn't science fiction. This is what just happened, like this week. So keeping in mind that that the CCP government is rapidly finding that all of its schemes are being hauled out into the light of day, we're getting more and more legitimate information on how much, say, COVID is a bioweapon. It's mutating too quickly to be a natural mutation. We know new strains are being injected. At this point, it's a question for legitimate law enforcement operative to figure out who's injecting it and bring them to justice. I can tell them who owns the patent on COVID and where they should be looking for the funding, but that's about the extent that I can go for there. But I want to stick with this, that SMIC fab is not to solve a shortage. It's not. It is to build internally the ARM processors that China believes that it will need in order to retain control of digital currencies. And part of that is the CCP does not want to lose the calculatory control of digital currencies. Now, they may lose it anyways, as legitimate users realize this is not a safe and secure transactional system. We can't use it. This isn't the right solution. Now, I can't tell you what the right solution is. I can tell you that it's not a digital currency. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over we're getting a lot of lip service coming back to PCAST. We're getting a lot of lip service from the Biden administration over science and technology advisors, but the advisors so far, at least anyone on this list, hasn't actually done anything. And those that have had success, they're probably too busy managing their success to have any realistic input on any advice given to the Democrat administration. And we're pretty sure that any good advice will be ignored. So this is I can't fault Dr. Lisa Su for accepting the nomination. I maybe there's a chance something good could come of this, but we're probably just looking at another stalling tactic instead of solving the problems of uh, products literally being stolen at gunpoint from factories by the CCP. This is probably just another stalling tactic where the Biden administration can go, we have PCAST working on it, but they're doing nothing. And that's Lisa Su can make all the recommendations she wants, but she's got a whole lot of people in here who have nothing to go on. I look, I'm going to be blunt here. If you think that anybody from Massachusetts Institute of Technology or Berkeley are really experts in their field, I got news for you. They aren't. And in fact, the fact that they're at that school to begin with probably tells you all you need to know about their accomplishments. And yes, I am being as rude as I can on that. Like it or not, the university system, what we know of the admission scandals, what we know of how people are being recruited to the schools and how they're being educated in those schools, we do know they are not turning out the engineers that they used to. Now, there may be some people out there who did go through a prestigious Ivy League school and may have learned something. But I'm not hearing of them at Intel. I'm not hearing of them at ARM. I'm not hearing of them at any major processing powerhouse. I'm not hearing of them at Western Digital. I'm not hearing of them anywhere. So where are all these people going? Facebook, Twitter, Google? That's pretty much dead ends now. And I realize I say this while I'm broadcasting on a Google platform, and I fully expect the various algorithms this will never see the light of day, so not too terribly concerned there. But let's bring this back. And let's talk for a second about somebody else who's, I can't believe I'm saying this, playing the good guy. And we're going to go back to that Fortune article, because right below where we have this call out that car manufacturers are 45 nanometers to 90 nanometers, you got Intel's chief executive, Pat Gelsinger, saying, I'll make them as many Intel 16 nanometer chips as they want. Gesslinger, it just makes no economic or strategic sense. Rather than spending billions on new old fabrication facilities, let's spend millions to help migrate designs to modern ones. This is actually sound, sane, and sensible advice. Instead of using older technology that's electrically inefficient, use newer technology that probably costs a lot less to make and may make your car more reliable. Can't have that now, can we? Now, there's an interesting nugget in here. I will make them as many Intel 16 nanometer chips as they want. That's an interesting number. Now, why exactly is that an interesting number? Let's see. GeForce, NVIDIA, GTX 1080 Ti, 16 nanometer FinFET. Look up something else. Let's go AMD, full list. Okay, there we go. And expand, and we're just going to scroll down. And we're looking for 16 nanometer. We go 28 nanometer to 14 nanometer to 7. All right. So let's look in the 14 nanometer section. That's interesting. The Vega 64 was fabbed on 14 nanometers. Quite interesting. What about the R9 290X? The same card that traded blows with the GeForce 1080. Let's see, which we're not looking for the top end. We're looking for the 1080 the 1080 base, 2016. So we're talking 4K GTX 1080. The R90 290X was still actually trading blows in 4K resolution with that card. Now, admittedly, that was the 8 gigabyte version and not the 4 gigabyte version. That was fabbed on 28 nanometers in 2013. That's an interesting observation. That Vega was on 14 nanometers. Almost all of the R9s are all 28 nanometers. Huh. That's very, very interesting. So, so here we are. We are 16 nanometer FinFET for all the way up until the Titan XP in 2017. That was actually a pretty powerful graphics card. And then we have various graphics cards. What was the Radeon 7 fabricated on? Okay, Radeon 7 was on a 7 nanometer process, so that was a die shrink. So our last major, the R9 Fury X, Fiji XT, in 2015. That's interesting. Intel can make all the 16 nanometer chips they want. One of the very first graphic cards to be performative in 4K was on a 28 nanometer process. One of the graphics cards that was fully playable in 4K was also on a 16 nanometer process. So, given that, why is Raja and the ZGPU team talking about 6 nanometer on TSMC? Here's the thing. TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor fabrication facilities, they have a limited amount of capacity, and various vendors compete, for lack of a better word, in the moment, to get fabrication capacity from TSMC. And I strongly doubt that even as vast as TSMC's resources are until they're, let's see, what is this? TSMC US Fab. TSMC plans to build US Fab in Taiwan to build and operate an advanced fab in the United States. But that'll be a 5 nanometer, not 6 nanometer. Faces delays. New advanced semiconductor fab from TSMC. Okay, here's the point. TSMC doesn't have the fabrication capacity to fill Intel's projected sales expectations. Not at the price point Intel needs to sell at. AMD RDNA 3 Navi 31 MCM to feature 256-bit GDR6 memory. Navi 33 expected to outperform RX 6900 XT at US $450. Intel's shooting at a moving target. We've heard claims that I first said here on livestream and on Twitter and elsewhere that the original prototype being shipped to developers, that Intel was targeting RTX 3080 performance. Now, since then, in this interview, Rogers kind of dialed it back and says that they're targeting 3070 Ti performance. Now, depending on who you talk to, the 3070 Ti, which isn't actually listed here on TechArp, previous Ti's are listed. We'll do a quick refresh and make sure it hasn't been listed yet. All right. But previous TIs, yeah, they do feature a massive performance boost over the base version. Now, based on the scaling ratios, the 3070 Ti probably can compete with the RTX 3080. It's not going to be probably an upgrade for a 3080 user, but it would probably be a crossgrade, kind of like going from the R9 290X to the R9 390X. You're not getting a whole lot, if anything. It's almost a crossgrade in performance. So, keeping that in mind, that here we have Intel officially targeting RTX 3070 Ti. AMD's next card, Navi 33 at US $450 MSRP, is supposed to outperform the RX 6900 XT. So if Intel is shooting for a 3070 Ti performance, that means they're shooting for a delta range of where the RX 6900 XT sits in a lot of Vulkan API applications. So Intel either needs to beat Navi 33 at $450, or they need to massively underprice. And here we have another problem, because it said that they're looking at a range of prices. And think $499 has been the top end price, and it'll be a 6 nanometer card. Now, for the record, I don't doubt for a second that the flagship top end card will be manufactured using TSMC 6 nanometer process. But I don't think TSMC has the volume to fill all of those $400 or $500 graphics cards for Intel. So I think Intel's sandbagging. I think that 16 nanometer fabrication capacity that Intel has, they're going to be using that to produce mid-range Z GPUs, now known as ARC. And I suspect that these ARC processors, these mid-range ones, are going to be targeted at the GTX 1080 and the R9. If you don't know this, all of the R9 cards, all of the Fiji cards have been end of lifed. I think the only one that's being kept around may be Radeon 7. Well, that's technically a Vega card, not a Fiji card. But looking over all of these R9s, R7s, everything in the Southern Islands, all of those have been end of lifed. They are no longer in AMD's driver support. NVIDIA's kind of stepped away from supporting the GTX series in general. Everything is now RTX. So if Intel can slip in at $250 to $299 on a 16 nanometer process and offer a graphics card that is a clear upgrade in ultra-wide QHD tech. I mean that if you have an R9 290X, you put in a mid-range 299 Intel Arc card and you get more frames per second, period, regardless of the application, then Intel has a smash hit on their hands. They just need the volume to produce that, and I think they have the internal fabrication capacity to do that, and I think Intel is sandbagging. So let's run over this one more time. We know that the CCP is lying about the SMIC fab. We know that PCAST is not going to do anything to help solve the tech problems that not just America, but any country is facing, especially in regards to the CCP. We know that from a performance perspective, the fabrication capacity that Intel has is enough to make a graphics card that can potentially go or based on AMD's work at 28 nanometers, can go toe to toe with 4K capable graphics cards. Admittedly, 4K capable graphics cards from a couple years ago, but memory technologies have improved. We don't know yet too much about the ARC memory system, but if we're looking at a graphics card that's shipping with either GDDR6 or LPDDR-X5, I think I got that right, not sure. We don't know too much about what Intel will be shipping in way of memory, and that could be a big factor uh, in the ARC GPU's favor, is how much bandwidth it has to work with. And we also have an idea of we can be pretty sure that even if Navi 33 does ship at an MSRP of US $450, unless AMD is able to get control of their board partners, these cards are never going to make it into gamers' hands. They are going to go to miners. They are going to go to people who have made arrangements to acquire these graphic cards straight from the ODM and OEM vendors. Now, this is where we come back to Intel, where we are pretty confident that Intel was in fact working with Secretary Pompeo and the Trump administration to secure supplies of rare earth minerals for Intel's own fabrication facilities. How extensive these supplies are, we don't know. Who's actually going to be manufacturing the ARC GPUs? We don't know. This may be a case of Intel could be manufacturing these cards entirely in house. Um, Intel motherboard manufacturer. Now, I've had an Intel branded motherboard before, and what I really don't know is is whether or not Intel had the capability to build their own graphics cards. I'm pretty sure that they have their own manufacturing facilities in house. They have fabrication facilities for FPGAs and um, silicon construction. So whether or not Intel can actually put together an entire system board, it wouldn't make sense to be a chip supplier and not have some kind of complete final assembly line fabrication capacity. I mean, I can see that happening. I just find it really difficult to see that happening. So we have some questions here over, is Intel actually sandbagging? Are they using the 6 nanometer as a red herring to keep everyone focused on the high end while they prepare a mid range hammer? Can AMD get hold of their board partners? And I'll say it again. The strongest advantage for AMD is the one they just displayed with Valve and the Steam Deck. I really should have checked to make sure that UL came first. Okay. The Steam Deck, we're pretty sure, already has millions of pre-sales. Steam concurrent players. Now, how many people actually play Steam? Steam increases concurrent players record. And we're 25 million concurrent players. Okay, how many people play Steam actually? How many people have a Steam account? Or what? Number of Steam users. Okay. And okay, here again we have 26.85 million concurrent users. Doesn't actually tell us how many people actually have a Steam account. And okay, Steam has, and this is Variety from 2019, they have over 1 billion accounts and 90 million active users. Let's go back and look at that stats page again. And what I really want to look at is the Steam hardware and software survey. Now, if we do OS version, we see that Linux users reported to have 1.02% of everyone who checked in. Now, this percentage is based on people who A, got the survey, and as I've mentioned several times in the past, I use Steam on Linux and Windows. Almost every month on the Windows systems, I get an opt in for the Steam hardware survey. Over the last 2 years, I can only count one time that I ever saw the Steam hardware survey on a Linux system. So if you do the math quick there, I've seen an average of 24 times over 2 years on Windows, and one out of those 24 months. What's my ratio going to look like? 1 out of 21 to 24? If I'm, responding on that Linux system, and I've only got in it 1 in 24 times, and everyone else has got it 24 times, well, of course I'm going to have a lower percentage because it hasn't come up as often. The other thing is that the Steam hardware survey is entirely dependent on people who agree to have to pass their information on. It's entirely opt-in. It is not a realistic representation of the actual Steam player base. Valve does have the actual data because each time Steam is installed and each time it runs, it does a quick scan of your hardware so that it knows what to do with your hardware. It does kind of have to know what graphic card you're using, what processor you're on, and what operating system you're using in order to get the right update for your computer. So Valve, even though they don't publish it, even though they only publish what people opt into, they do have the other numbers, and that's why Valve is not joking. I repeat, Valve is not joking that the Steam Deck is going to be a major upgrade for most Steam gamers. They're not joking. They're not lying. They're not exaggerating. They're not embellishing. They're not using hyperbole. Valve is dead serious. The Steam Deck will be a hardware upgrade. But if you looked at the Steam hardware survey results, you'd go, well, how can that be? Because the survey results aren't accurate. Now, how many people do I think are actually using Linux on a day-to-day basis in Steam? Okay, if the number was over 5%, I would actually be kind of surprised. Now, part of that is due to how if you are a gamer, you know how to get Windows keys. You know how to get an OEM copy. You probably know some forum or some Discord where they'll tell you where to go buy a key, and Microsoft is perfectly fine with authorizing you for that $5 or $10 Windows 10 Pro key that you got off of a OEM ODM key site. Keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind the vast number of games that uh, have ridiculous draconian restriction maneuvers, DRM, or don't really mind us. Yeah, I'm trying not to be vulgar on this one. But all of those games that have some sort of DRM outside of Steam single sign-on that won't work on Linux because they have DRM or require a .NET launcher that doesn't work properly on Linux. Because of all those games, most people probably have a Windows installation, or they have a laptop, or they have something else that they probably play on. And again, going back to earlier, I don't. I use a Linux system on my media server, and that has Steam installed on it. And I love sitting on my couch and playing my Steam games using a controller and using the big picture mode. And that's running on a Linux system. But in the past 2 years, I only got that hardware survey once. On my laptop, which is a Windows system, and my main desktop, which normally am booted into Windows, it does have a Linux installed on this. Don't really boot into it much because if I'm having to do something where I need to show somebody on Windows, I kind of need to be running Windows. Because of that barrier, because of the number of developers who just go screw Linux, those numbers are skewed anyways. Because a lot of people just say, I'm not going to put up with that. I'm not going to jump through these hoops to get my favorite game working when I can just get a valid Windows key and either run through a VM or just install it on a different partition, and when I want to play, I just reboot and here I go. So Valve saying that the Steam Deck is going to be a hardware upgrade and that they are paying developers to solve the problem of lazy developers is a pretty big deal. Valve's not lying. Steam Deck will be an upgrade for the vast majority of the Steam player base, and it probably will be the most powerful computer many Steam players can get their hands on. This is again come back to Intel to this 16 nanometer claim. I think Intel, probably after the AMD Steam Deck launches, are probably going to announce their version with a Z GPU, or an ARC branded. Sorry, I've been calling it Z GPU for so long. Kind of hard to break that habit. They're probably going to launch an ARC branded Steam compatible, or maybe they'll even use the, get with Valve and have the Steam Deck Intel edition. We'll just have an Intel and an ARC GPU instead of an AMD with an AMD APU. I really see I really see Intel going down that path as well. So, to recap one more. Okay, the reason why I'm going to recap one more time, we'll come back to this. We're starting with we're wow. We're starting with SMIC, full of it. CCP still trying to maintain control without having to buy up massive amounts and empower massive amounts of graphics cards. We got Intel trying to push car manufacturers to use a modern system and bragging about their 16 nanometer capacity. We've got graphics cards that have been made at 28 nanometers and 16 nanometers FinFET that have offered 4K performance. We've got Russia probably sandbagging on exactly what the range of graphic cards will be. We got a moving performance target that Intel needs to shoot for where NVIDIA and AMD will be at, not where they are right now. So, and then we got the Steam Deck. A big upgrade for most Steam users. This is why I come around to this. They're coming back here to PCast. Got a lot of names here. A lot of PhDs, a lot of ostensibly higher educated people. But none of these have done anything to solve the actual problems with the supply. None of them have done anything to bring manufacturers who are keeping alive old fabs. And yeah, there's some reason for, why an old fab might be useful. But is it really a good reason? Probably not. I really don't have much more to offer on this. Gone through all my notes. One of the other things I just kind of wanted to point out. Where is it? Cell broadband engine. What was this fab on? Anyone know? It was fabbed on 90 nanometers. Car manufacturers, 90 nanometers. PS3, or rather the Power PC that the Power Series arrived from, we're looking at what? 2006, 2008? Yeah, 2006. Your modern car still uses computing technology that was bleeding edge in 2008? Really? Doesn't seem like a car manufacturer is very bleeding edge now, does it? Alright. This has been Aurian Archive.